evening. Welcome to council. Please join me in a word of prayer, please. We come before you this hour asking your blessing and help as we are gathered. We pray for your guidance in the matters at hand, and we ask that you would clearly show us how to conduct the work in the best interest of the city and its residents. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council is called to order. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Here.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Here.
Mr. James?
Here.
Mr. Matlin?
Here.
Mr. McDaniel?
Here.
Mr. Schoonover?
Here.
Ms. Sitterly?
Here.
Mr. Stoughton?
Here.
And Mrs. Teener? Here.
Reading and disposal of the journal. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we excuse President Wool from tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to excuse President Wool from tonight's meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we'll go to the reading and disposal of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated December 13th, 2021, and the organizational meeting minutes dated January 3rd, 2022.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion to receive and file the journal. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Reports of city officials.
Believe it or not, I can actually say there are none to be presented.
That's good. Communications.
There is one. Notice to the legislative authority of a new liquor license to the Buckeye Nail Spa LLC doing business as Buckeye Nail Spa, located at 1405 Edie Road, Lancaster, Ohio, submitted by the Ohio Division of Liquor Control.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communication.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We do have a special presentation tonight. I would like to invite Susan Stoughton forward, Executive Director of the Lighthouse Domestic Violence Shelter of Fairfield County. Thank you for coming, Susan.
Thank you very much for asking me to come. So the Lighthouse is Fairfield County's domestic violence shelter. If something were to happen to us, there would not be domestic violence services from between Columbus and Athens, Ohio. We help a lot with Hocking County as well as Perry County. They too do not have shelters. But beyond what we do on the shelter side is we work with victims through the Victim Advocacy Program. We employ 4 full-time victim advocates who work between Common Pleas Court and Court of Common Pleas and Municipal Court. Had a meeting with them today with the 2 judges at Municipal Court. We're going to finally, after many, many years, be able to bring all 4 advocates together, and they will be downtown so that when we have vacations, we actually have coverage and the courts don't suffer because we have people out. Everybody will be cross-trained. That said, it's hard to believe that we send people to the moon, finding different cancers that we're able to cure, but we're still dealing with domestic violence. With the pandemic, there were lots of stories how there was more violence going on in the homes, much of it going unreported because folks were at home all the time and couldn't get away from their abusers. With that said, last year through the court system, we helped 1,166 people through the court system alone. In shelter, our numbers were down a bit. We assisted 70 clients and provided 2,630 nights of shelter. And we processed 202 crisis calls. We don't charge a dime for anything that we do. Victims advocates, they may be, and Stephanie, you would know this, they might be with a client once, they might be with a client several times as they go through the court process. The way that I am funded is through grants, general donations, and what I'm here to talk to you about tonight, fundraising events. So we are hosting the first, so we're calling this our inaugural, but we already know it will come back based on ticket sales that have already happened. We are doing a dueling pianos night, and it is being hosted through, it's a company called Howl at the Moon. It's called Howl to Go. They're coming in from Chicago, and it's part comedy and part music. And everything that they raise, tip jar wise, and anybody that's ever been to a dueling piano type event, there are tips that are created for them to try to play the songs that people want to hear. That all comes back to the Lighthouse, as well as securing sponsors and selling tickets. We hope this year our target's 256 seats that we would like to sell. It's being held at the Eagles on Saturday, February 26th. And without even trying, we haven't really advertised until tonight that we are selling tickets. We're already halfway there. So we expect to sell out with all of the money going to benefit the Lighthouse. So anybody that might be available, anybody who's watching City Council, if you're interested in getting tickets, you can do so through our website, www.lancasterlh.org. And there are 2 different ways that you can purchase tickets. We can't do what we do without the support. The city's always been a great supporter of ours. Anytime that I pick up the phone and call, somebody seems to be there that is wanting to help. As proven today, when I went and met with the 2 judges downtown. It does take a village to try to help these folks, and we couldn't do it without you. So the fact that President Wool reached out to me, asked me to come and spend a couple of minutes talking about this, I just want to let you guys know how important it is to those that we serve. And hopefully one day we'll get to the point where we really don't need to talk about this domestic violence. We're just not there yet. Questions? Anybody have any questions for me about what we do and why we do it? You've got one. Do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but how can people getting your message donate to the Lighthouse?
So if you would like to make a contribution to, and Trish, great question, to the Lighthouse, it can be mailed to Post Office Box 215, Lancaster, Ohio. And again, tickets, go to our website, lancasterlh.org. Any questions? Anybody?
Can you buy a whole table?
Huh?
Can you buy a whole table?
You can save money if you buy a table. Tickets are $35 a piece, and if you buy a table of 8, it's $250. And we've sold many, Jennifer. It's exciting.
How
Yes,
many
ma'am.
tables are left?
So we're selling some individual tickets, so I'd have to kind of boil it
Okay.
down. But I would say 15.
Okay.
Any
Anyone
other
else?
questions?
Thank you so much for coming, Susan. We
Thank you
much
all.
appreciate it. This is a critically vital need in the community. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming tonight.
I have a great staff. We couldn't do it without them.
So at this time, we have permission for voters and taxpayers to address council. Seeing the audience, I see an awful lot of departments. Is there anyone here who would like to address council this evening? Okay, I'm not going to read the preamble, then I thank you all for being here. Reports of standing committees.
I have one, and this is a 2021 report, Water Pollution Control Committee meeting dated December 8th, 2021, submitted by Mr. James.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of standing committees.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of standing committees. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed? Motion carries. We have no special committees currently. We have no public hearings for tonight. At this time, we have quite a large agenda. We have several things we need to do. This is the first meeting of council. We have some organizational things to do to get prepared for 2022, 2023. At this time, I'm going to request a motion and a second to go outside the regular order of business.
President Pro Tem McDaniel, I move for Lancaster City Council to suspend its rules and go outside the regular order of business to consider the 2022 and 2023 committee assignments and engage in an executive session for the purposes described in Ohio Revised Code, Section 121.22G4, prior to the reading of resolutions.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and go outside the regular order of business. This requires a roll call vote. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0. We will now go through our committee assignments. In front of everyone should have been the proposal for the 2022-2023 committee assignments, listing the chairman and 2 members of each committee. This is a difficult process, as you may know. We've got 9 people with interest in various committees. I assigned committees this year as we did the previous term. I solicited information and input from each of you. I asked for your top 2 choices for chairmanship and your top 2 choices for membership. I received replies from everyone. And then I put the puzzle together, trying to get as many people accommodated in the areas they felt they wanted to serve. And I think generally this document in front of you reflects that. I know that there were a couple of people that had other choices. What I would say as a point of reference for all of us, not being on a certain committee doesn't mean you can't attend those committee meetings, provide input at those committees, get all the information that committee has available from agendas and minutes, or simply being present at that committee. So not being assigned to a certain committee doesn't exclude you from attending and participating and being a city representative at that meeting. You may not vote for the committee agenda items, but you can certainly add information. And many of you have already attended multiple committees that you weren't assigned to because you had an interest in a certain item. I encourage you to continue to do that. And at this time, I would open up the floor to discussion regarding committee assignments. Mrs. Teener.
Yes, and I understand it's a task. However, I do have a problem, and I never have had before with assignments, but going now into my 5th term on Lancaster City Council, I can't ever remember having a problem with a committee appointment for myself. However, I will be voting no on my appointment to the IT committee. I ask once again to be appointed to the service committee. However, the reason was given, 6 people asked to be appointed to that committee. I know my not getting my request assignment has to do with me acting on a complaint about the Parks Department. Also, I was being transparent, and I was also being transparent regarding the Parks levy. As a city council person, we don't hire and fire people. However, when a complaint or concern comes up from an individual, it is our duty to act on it. The individual that came to me with the issue regarding the Parks incident was replaced from the Tree Commission. One can say that he was replaced because his term was up. However, that is hard to believe. Also, 4 councilmen, 3 of whom have served less time than myself, retained their chairman assignments. And I was also able to keep 2 of my member assignments from my term that we just finished. Just to let everyone be aware, from now on, when I receive a complaint regarding a department head, employee, etc., I will be calling an executive session to give all the information at one time to everyone. I will consult resources inside and outside the city to substantiate any allegations brought to my attention. For the last 8 years, I have brought different concerns with proven facts to the city administration regarding issues with employees. Switching my assignment will not change my going after wrongdoings in the city. My loyalty is to the citizens, business owners, and the city workers, at least the city workers that are honest and hardworking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Teener. Any others? Tom?
I would like to thank you for assigning me again to the water pollution control. We've got so many competent leadership in those departments right now, and we've got so much to deal with going forward. And I'm looking forward. It's my privilege and honor to continue to do that. Once again, I appreciate the assignment.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, yes, Mr. Stoughton.
I just want to thank you for having to do that. I mean, has to be a difficult task, trying to, get the wishes of 9 people into 27 spots. And again, it sounds like, we have some folks that are happy and some that are not. And I know it's a thankless job, so thank you for doing that. I'm sure it took quite
I would close with the thought that all of our committees are important to this council. It's our way of reaching out to department heads, citizens who might attend a meeting, other interested parties, and providing that information back to us. As President Oles stated in the past, we couldn't possibly attend all these various committee meetings as a council of the whole. Too much time would be involved. So having these committees is vitally important to the work of council. So at this time, if there's no other discussion, I would entertain a motion to approve the committee assignments as provided in writing prior to this meeting by myself. Anyone?
Mr. President, I'll make a motion to approve these committee assignments as set.
Motion by Jack,
I will second that motion.
seconded by Tom, and I believe we need a roll call vote for that.
That is correct. Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Ms. Teener?
No.
Motion passes 8-1. The final thought on the committee assignments, these are our committee assignments for this term, the 22-23 council term. At this time, I request a motion to convene into executive session.
President Pro Tem McDaniel, I make a motion for council as a whole to convene into executive session to consider preparing for, conducting, or reviewing negotiations or bargaining sessions with public employees concerning their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment pursuant to Ohio Revised Code Section 121.22G4. The executive session should include the following: Council President Pro Tem, council members, law director, senior attorney, mayor, auditor, service safety director, treasurer, and HR director.
Second. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second to convene into executive session. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
We are in executive session.
Sorry, I don't.
Life is unpredictable. That's why estate planning is important. Estate planning provides you comfort and peace of mind knowing that you're taking care of your loved ones and ensuring your legacy lives on just as you envisioned. You lived a life that is beautifully and uniquely yours. You deserve an estate planning attorney who understands that and creates a plan as unique as you and in the best interest of your loved ones. You deserve the local, trusted, experienced attorneys at Dagger Law.
There is no place like Lancaster, Ohio, and Fairfield County, and like you, I am proud to call them home. As a longtime resident of Lancaster and graduate of Lancaster High School, this community is important to me, and I want to provide superior customer service, professionalism, integrity, and honesty at the Connor Insurance Agency. I am committed to supporting local programs and projects through my volunteer work and board membership with several organizations. It has been a great honor to work with all the first responders throughout Lancaster, Fairfield County, and the state of Ohio to put on Kids and Cops Day, to be a part of Shop with a Cop alongside the Lancaster Police Department and JFS, and to help Lancaster Public Education Foundation raise funds to support our local public schools and teachers. These men and women work hard to protect and support our community, and I would like to take this moment to say thank you for all they do. My goal as a business owner and insurance agent is to provide my clients with the most appropriate services and coverage for their needs at a competitive rate. As an independent agent, I have several carriers to choose from so I can customize your insurance coverage to fit your needs and desires. I strive to make sure there are no gaps in your coverage that could be harmful, and just as important, that you are not overinsured. I look forward to serving your insurance needs now and in the future. At Connor Insurance, we are here to serve you by protecting what is important to you. Please contact my office at 740-654-2848 for a full list of services and carriers, or visit my website, ConnorInsuranceAgency.com.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
legislation, page 2.
Fast.
Yeah. Pretty awesome, huh? Whoops, this is not, it's crazy.
We'll give it just a minute. All right, at this time, I request a motion to leave executive session.
President Pro Tem McDaniel, I move for the board to leave executive session and reconvene the regular meeting of Lancaster City Council at this time.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mr. Kreitz? Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr.
And
James?
Mrs. Craig.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Mr. Stoughton?
Come on.
Yes.
All right.
If you can't laugh at yourself, who can you laugh at, right? Okay. And Mrs. Teener?
Here, yes.
Here.
I forgot what we were saying.
Preston's
All right.
first, so
I have
Motion
no clue right
to
now.
return to the regular meeting has passed 9-0. I request a motion to resume the normal order of business.
President Pro Tem McDaniel, I move to resume the normal order of business as required by the rules of council at this time.
second.
Motion is second, return to the normal order of business. Is that a roll call also? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to return to the normal order of business passes 9-0. At this time, we will move to the reading of resolutions. Nothing in third reading. It looks like we have several for first reading. Temporary ordinance 122. Resolution, yes, thank you.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am, please read them.
A resolution authorizing the Law Director's Office to apply for the Violence Against Women Act VAWA grant, offered by Mrs. Kreitz, seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr.
On this reading.
First reading.
Thank you. First of three readings. So as we move through this legislation for council members, as the clerk reads the legislation, she will be assigning the sponsor and the second. So please pay attention, and we'll work through this as slowly as possible so we all get it. I know there are some first-timers tonight. We were all first-timers. We'll work through it. So, temporary resolution.
Wait a second. Who was the second on this first piece then?
Mrs. Teener.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Temporary resolution 222.
A resolution authorizing the City of Lancaster to participate in the State of Ohio Cooperative Purchasing Program, offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of resolution numbered temporarily numbered 2-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 2-22. Mrs. Kreitz, any discussion?
Not at this time.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ehlers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 2-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 2-22. Any discussion? Mrs. Kreitz?
No.
Any-
It's an annual piece.
A lot of what we're doing tonight are annual pieces. Any other discussion? Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Mr. Ayers,
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz,
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 2-22 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 3-22.
A resolution authorizing the City of Lancaster to participate in the Sourcewell Cooperative Purchasing Program offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of resolution temporarily numbered 3-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 3-22. Mrs. Kreitz.
This is an annual piece as well.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers,
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz,
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 3-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 3-22. Any further discussion, Mrs. Kreitz?
No, sir.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers,
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to pass 9-0. 4-22.
A resolution authorizing the a resolution authorizing the Lancaster City Auditor to request an advance of funds from Fairfield County of the city's apportionment of tax settlement for 2022, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first of two readings, please.
Two readings on 4-22. Temporary Resolution 5-22.
A resolution authorizing the disposition of city property no longer needed via auction or internet auctions for 2022, offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mrs. Kreitz.
This is the first of three readings.
First of three readings on Temporary Resolution 5-22. Temporary Resolution 6-22.
A resolution to enter into a renewal agreement with the Ohio Department of Development for Housing Revolving Loan Fund Administration, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 622.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary numbered 6-22. Mr. Schoonover.
Again, like some of these other ones, the suspension this is an annual piece. So that's what we're asking for suspension.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers,
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz,
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 622.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary number 6-22. Mr. Schoonover.
I have nothing else at this time.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers,
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly.
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton.
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to pass 6-22 passes 9-0. Sorry about that. Temporary resolution 7-22.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to act on behalf of the city and enter into any and all agreements required for the consideration of award of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources Nature Works Grant, offered by Ms. Sitterly, seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Ms.
Mr.
Sitterly.
President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 7-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary numbered 7-22. Miss Sitterly?
I believe it's, allowing the mayor to apply for a grant. I don't know if that's time sensitive.
Actually, we've already received the grant, this is just approving to accept.
Oh, accept it. Well,
Yeah.
then, even better.
Correct, that's even better.
Like money.
So, Mr. President Pro Temp, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 7-22. Oh, I'm sorry, roll call.
Oh, yeah, we need to go through the suspension first, and then we'll come back.
Yeah.
Ready for me to call?
Yes, please do.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Mrs. Sitterly, Miss Sitterly, we'll
Okay.
get this right at some point.
I don't know if we will.
I was too excited last time. Mr. President Pro Temp, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 7-22.
We have did I hear a second on that?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record, resolution temporarily numbered 7-22. Any further discussion, Mrs. Sitterly? Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to pass 9-0. We'll get that correct here in a minute. All right, temporary resolution 8-22.
A resolution to appropriate funds in the Stormwater Utility Reserve Fund 6019, amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor, increase receipts, and approve the issuance of then and now certificates for the purchase orders previously encumbered in the 6019 fund and now reappropriate in the 6019 fund, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary 822, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 8-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. This and other resolutions that will be considered tonight are reappropriating money that gets unappropriated at the end of a calendar year for us. So to keep projects moving, we need to reappropriate monies that are in these utility reserve and capital funds. This happens to be the stormwater utility reserve. Hence my reason for asking for suspension.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary 822, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 8-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Nothing further.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to pass 9-0. Thank you. Get ahead of myself here.
It's a lot of pieces.
Temporary resolution 9-22.
A resolution to appropriate funds in the Water and Wastewater Construction Fund and the Water and Wastewater Reserve Funds and authorize payments of bills, offered by Mrs. Kreitz, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary 922, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 9-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. This resolution is reappropriating monies that we use for loan and note payments for water construction projects, water utility reserve, wastewater utility reserve, and the wastewater construction projects. I think we have to have these monies appropriated as a part of our bond covenant, so we're asking for suspension this evening.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Resolution Temporary 922, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 9-22. Mr. Stoughton?
Nothing further.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 922 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 10-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the General Fund 101, offered by Mr. Stoughton, seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first of two readings, please.
First of two readings on 10-22. Temporary resolution 11-22.
A resolution of consent for preliminary legislation for replacement of school zone flashers within with the Ohio Department of Transportation District 5, PID number 109619, offered by Mr. Ayers and seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. Ayers.
We're asking for two readings, but I just want to add that these flashers are by the high school and on 22 by Hunter's Trace for Gorsuch.
Thank you. First of two readings on 11-22. Temporary resolution 12-22.
A resolution to carry over and reappropriate funds to pay bills in the wastewater replacement and improvement fund 6023, and to authorize the issuance of a then and now certificates for payment of bills, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of Resolution Temporary 1222, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 12-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The key, when you hear the issuance of then and now certificates, means we've gotten bills in and we need to continue to pay bills. Hence, we're going to reappropriate these monies into the 2022 budget.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Resolution Temporary 1222, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary number 12-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Nothing further.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 12-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 13-22.
A resolution authorizing the Lancaster Police Department to apply for the 2021-2022 Drug Use Prevention Grant, offered by Mr. Matlin, seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Matlin.
First of three.
First of three readings on 13-22. Temporary resolution 14-22.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to dispense with competitive bidding for sole source provider and to authorize the issuance of a then and now certificate, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Thank you, President Pro Tem McDaniel. At this time, I'd like to make a motion that council waive its rules and suspend and waive its rules of the second and third reading of temporary resolution 14-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 13-22. Mr. James.
I'll save it, thank you.
Excuse me,
Please call the roll.
tickle in my throat.
Yes, that's the time.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. James?
Yes, thank you, President Pro Tem McDaniel. This time I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 14-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 14-22. Mr. James?
I think I would like to call and yield some time to Superintendent Nixon to give us a little more detail, please.
Yes, members of council, this resolution will allow us to buy a backup redundant pump for the Upper Hocking pump station. This is one of the smaller pumps. It's a 60 horsepower pump, and we just had one go out last week, and it's in the shop to be repaired. Hopefully they can get the parts soon. I appreciate suspension tonight because this is an 8 to 10 week lead time to get a new pump. The new pump we have budgeted, I have the money to pay for it, but it exceeds the $50,000 limit statutorily. So with this legislation, I'll be able to issue a purchase order and get this pump on order and hopefully here. And then hopefully the one they have in Cincinnati is going to be about $30,000 repair it. And then I'll be coming back in the next meeting once I get prices. We have 160 horsepower pumps in that station as well. I'll be coming back once I know the price to have a redundant spare pump for that. So again, thank you for your consideration for suspension and passage.
Thank you, Superintendent Nixon.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 14-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 15-22.
A resolution of support authorizing the city administration to act on behalf of the city of Lancaster and enter into any and all agreements required for consideration and award of Central Ohio Rural Planning Organization Grant, offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. Schoonover?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of temporary resolution 1522.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 15-22. Mr. Schoonover?
I apologize, I missed this piece in my meeting prep, so I understand the preamble and that it's to apply for a grant, but I have no details on the grant, so
I see Mitch coming forward to.
There we go.
my guy to the rescue.
Good evening. Yeah, this is something, this is actually a catch-up piece for us, and I apologize for that. So, just to give you a little bit of background, Corpo, Central Ohio Rural Planning Organization, has never been funded, ever. MORPC, which is, Corpo is kind of a little sector of MORPC, and MORPC, if you're in the MPO, which is up in the Columbus area, they have funding. It's called the attributable funds that you can competitively go after. Well, when we're part of that, I always kind of beat on those guys and say, well, why don't you fund Corpo? You know, the people that are outside of the MPO never get funded. Well, they actually threw some money into that, and it's about $990,000 for a 2-year period. And we found out on November 4th that they funded it, and they wanted their applications back by December 13th. So we had a very short time training. We started trying to figure out, well, what type of project could this be? It's not a whole lot of money because the Corpo area is a very, very large area. It includes a lot of rural areas, and we know that there's going to be a lot of people trying to get pieces of that money. So we actually submitted an application December 13th at the deadline, and but we needed to get this. This is kind of a consent legislation, and this project that we put together was on South Broad Street, trying to extend the downtown area from Maine down to South Columbus on South Broad, and it was improvement of some sidewalks and some different configuration of some parking areas along that sections, and extension of the bike path. And it's approximately, we're asking about $150,000 from Corpo. And the matching funds that we tried to work through is through Linda's CDBG funding that we're gonna match. She's got about $150,000 that we're gonna try to match and make this project work. And we're hopeful. I didn't want to not submit something to Corpo because I've been telling them, you need to give us some, fund it so we can do something. And so this is kind of a catch-up piece, and we don't know whether we've got the project or not, but that's what we're shooting for. So that's it in a nutshell.
All right, we are voting on a motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 1522.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 1522. Mr. Schoonover,
No, thanks.
any discussion?
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
You're fine. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 15-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 1622.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance and amend the certificate with the county auditor in the Information Services Fund 7020, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary 1622, please.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporary numbered 16-22. Mr. Stoughton.
I'm gonna invite Mr. Starr up because this is, he's here and he's asking for an additional, stipend for the 2022 budget, so, Mr. Starr.
Thank you. Yeah, what this is the city IT department, we have a capital improvement fund we use to replace the aging tornado sirens throughout the city. In this year's budget, I made a snafu and had more in expenses than I had budgeted in revenue coming in. Trish Nettles, auditor, called it in her due diligence, and so it's just a piece of legislation to adjust that so everything's back to equal.
I was looking for my budget and I couldn't find it. Do you have anything in your budget prior to this for tornado sirens?
Yes, we started the fund last year, or 21.
Yeah.
And so we had a carryover, and I think that's where the mistake was. I didn't have as much left over from last year as I thought I did. So when I put more money into it this year to finish the project, I didn't put
And
it.
remind me how many we replaced last year and how many we're replacing this year?
4, we did 4 last year, we're doing 4 this year.
Okay, all right, good. Thank you.
Mr. James.
Just real quick, the amount once again is $25,000? What are you looking for?
Additional will cover the expense. The
Okay.
total amount is $150,000 each year.
150, okay.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporary 1622, please.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 16-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Nothing further.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 16-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 1722.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an agreement with ODOT to purchase sodium chloride rock salt for the 2022-2023 winter season. Offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Ms. Sitterly.
Mr. Schoonover.
First of 3 readings, please.
Second.
First of 3 readings on temporary resolution 1722. Temporary Resolution 1822.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of salt for use by the Water Department, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Matlin.
Mr. James.
This will be the first of three readings, please.
First of three readings on Temporary Resolution 1822, Temporary Resolution 1922.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the purchase of phosphate for use by the Water Department, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
Yes, this is also the first of three readings. Thanks.
President, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Of the administration, is there any reason why we've been doing this, honest to goodness, since I started. Is there any reason why we don't combine those two? I'm just curious.
Just different vendors? I think so. I mean, I could ask, I could look into that, but you're right, this is an annual piece.
Yeah, we do it every year.
We see every year, so.
First meeting, actually. So
Rock salt is different on the road than the.
Yeah, no, I get it.
But phosphorus and salt, they are two different vendors.
Look, it took me 19 years to figure it out, all right? So I thought I'd ask the question.
Well, that's a good question, but it'll be the first of three readings on Temporary Resolution 1922.
Not much value to the question, but the question nevertheless.
Temporary Resolution 20-22.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the General Fund 1001 and reduce the appropriation in the 3 Mill Street Levy Fund 2009, Law Director VAWA Fund 2025, and LDOT Improvement Fund 3014, amend their certificate with the County Auditor's Office, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of Resolution Temporary 2022, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of Resolution temporarily numbered 20-22. Mr. Stoughton.
I'm going to ask Auditor Nettles about this piece.
I'm sorry for not, I apologize for not getting an email out to everybody beforehand. I really am sorry. Going through and trying to rebalance the 2022 budget with the revenue source, I've come into that you have the 3 mil and the levy fund and the LDOT didn't have the carryover that they anticipated, carryover cash which they set the 2022 budget against. So they're having to come down and lower the budget to align with their actual cash. They actually had bills that they didn't anticipate get paid in November and December that they thought were going to go over into carryover cash, but did not. So I have to lower those to come in line with carryover cash. And the VAWA account, the grant, the revenue amount was reduced. So they have a revenue loss for 2022 in that account from what they set budgeted. And I was talking with Clerk Sandy on the VAWA grant, and they needed to then recoup that and ask general fund to increase and give the $13,800 from general to make up the revenue loss. So it's doing it kind of in one piece, so you didn't have two separate pieces of legislation.
Okay. Well, as I was reading my revenue report that the mayor had sent out, I noticed that the 3 mil levy was more than what we collected. I think it might have been more than what we planned to spend, but I wasn't aware of these other things. So, hey, they are what they are, but I appreciate the explanation.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass and gross and enter upon the written record Resolution Temporary 2022, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass and gross and enter upon the written record Resolution temporarily numbered 20-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Oh, my goodness.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary Resolution 20-22 passes 9-0. Temporary Resolution 21-22.
A resolution to accept the recommendations of the fact finder for AFSCME Local 3427 collective bargaining agreement with respects to competitive or compensation and other working conditions. Offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of Resolution Temporary 2122, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 21-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. We received a report from the fact finder that requires us to act within 7 days of the issuance of the fact-finding report. So we have to either accept or reject this resolution. Hence, suspension.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Resolution Temporary 2122, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 21-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We met in executive session just kind of to review the findings from the fact finder, which in my opinion, I don't find advantageous to the city. Actually, I find a couple of them harmful to the city. So it's my recommendation that we reject this report from the fact finder by voting no.
Discussion. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
No.
Mrs. Kreitz?
No.
Mr. James?
No.
Mr. Matlin?
No.
Mr. McDaniel?
No.
Mr. Schoonover?
No.
Ms. Sitterly?
No.
Mr. Stoughton?
No.
And Mrs. Teener.
No.
Temporary resolution 21-22 fails 9-0. Temporary resolution 2222.
Yes, 22 next. A resolution authorizing the City of Lancaster to participate in the Master Intergovernmental Cooperative Purchasing Agreement administered by Omnia Partners Public Sector, offered by Mr. Stoughton and seconded by Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of Resolution Temporary 2222.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 22-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a cooperative purchasing agreement that obviously gets us beneficial cooperative, large volume pricing. So we are asking for suspension so we can leverage the service as soon as possible.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mr. Stoughton.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record Resolution Temporary 2222, please.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 22-22. Mr. Stoughton.
Nothing further?
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 22-22 passes 9-0. Temporary resolution 2322.
A resolution declaring the necessity of an election on the question of an alternative plan for the composition of the city's legislative authority pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code 731.01B, offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mrs. Kreitz.
First of three readings?
First of three readings on 23-22. Is So we've completed the reading of the resolutions. We will now move to the reading of ordinances. We have no third readings. Second reading on temporary ordinance 49-21.
An ordinance to conform the boundaries of the city of Lancaster, Ohio, and Hocking Township, Ohio pursuant to the regular annexation of 25.8723 plus minus acres in Hocking Township and to declare an emergency. Offered by Ms. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 49-21.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 49-21. Mrs. Kreitz.
Yes, thank you. This is the final piece of legislation needed regarding the annexation of the Loves property off of State Route 188 in the US 33 bypass. This legislation will conform the boundaries of the city of Lancaster and Hocking Township pursuant to the annexation.
Please call the roll.
Change the sheet here, hold on.
You're fine.
Oh, I did, I put the wrong one. Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 49-21.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 49-21. Mrs. Kreitz,
Nothing further.
any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 49-21 passes 9-0. We will now have first reading on two ordinances, starting with temporary ordinance 1-22.
An ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Lancaster, Ohio, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Kreitz and seconded by Mr. Schoonover.
Mrs. Kreitz.
Mr. President Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third readings of ordinance temporarily numbered 1-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 1-22. Discussion, Mrs. Kreitz.
I would defer to our law director.
So this is an annual piece that we have to do in order to make the Lancaster codified ordinances line up with all of the adoptions and amendments that you all have done in the previous year.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 9-0. Mrs. Kreitz.
Nothing further.
Any discussion? Oh, yeah.
Oh,
motion.
sorry. Mr. President
I'm
Pro
ahead of you.
Tem,
We're
I
both on
would,
the same wavelength.
we are. I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 1-22.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 1-22. Any further discussion?
Nothing further.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Ayers?
Yes.
Mrs. Kreitz?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Ms. Sitterly?
Yes.
Mr. Stoughton?
Yes.
And Mrs. Teener.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 1-22 passes 9-0. Temporary ordinance 2-22.
One of two readings.
An ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute all documents and pay any fees necessary to accept canal land from the state of Ohio, offered by Ms. Kreitz and seconded by Mrs. Teener.
One of two readings.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 2-22. Do we have any other legislation to come before council this evening? We have no tabled legislation. Do we have any unfinished business?
I'd like to ask a question, Law Director. the resolution 2322 about the possibly adding another council person.
Correct.
What's the process after this gets to the election and primary here in May? What's the process after that if it passes?
If it passes, then it goes to the Board of Elections, who puts it on the ballot. And, you know, if the voters decide to choose an alternative plan for the composition of the city's legislative authority, then we have 6 ward members and then 4 at large. If they choose not to, then at that point, the city administration and the GIS coordinator would go through and divide the city into 7 wards and keep those 3 at-large positions as they are.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matlin. The question there, I'll just piggyback on that question. The city is, population census put us over a 40,000. What is our current population?
40,552.
552, right.
40,552. As a result of that population increase, it necessitates adding a council member. And this legislation gives the opportunity for the public to decide whether they want that council member to be an at-large representative representing the whole city, or whether they want it to be a ward representation. And I'm sure we'll have some further discussion on that as we move forward with this. Again, that was the first of 3 readings on that particular item. Any other unfinished business? Any new business? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I was called about, I don't know, probably the first week of December. And I don't watch the Christmas tree coming in. I didn't see it on the parks thing or anything, but I got a call about a week or so later about the way it was brought in and safety measures weren't used, and we were in OSHA violations. And I got the number of the girl that I guess somebody had called, and I spoke with her. And are we still going through this with them? Are we done with the teaching of bringing the tree in? Because I only saw it one time when they did Cedar Heights, and I didn't know that we were doing anything that wasn't right.
So, as a city, we don't really fall under OSHA regulations. We fall under the Bureau of Workers' Comp, under a public employee risk reduction program, which they have reached out to us. They have assigned an officer to us, and they're looking into things of employee safety. They were not there to deal with anything about the tree going from the house to that time. That might just be an opinion of somebody that it was not traveling safe down the road, but that is not what BWC is concerned about. They were concerned about the safety of the employees when they were putting the tree up and dealing with those issues right there. So right now, we've utilized BWC to inspect and look at our facilities before. They've been here for 2 inspections of 2 departments right now, and they got about 2 more to go, and we've been working with them and talking with them.
Do you have to, I don't know how, do they have to go through, do they come in and show, I guess I'm kind of surprised that we weren't doing the measures anyway, I guess, to begin with, whatever it is they need us to do.
So are you talking in regards to transporting the tree?
No, when it got here, I don't know anything about the transport. I didn't even watch the video when I was told that it was there. I did read some of the comments, which were kind of hilarious, but it was the putting the tree up, it seemed to be the problem, not the transporting of it.
Right, it was not even putting the tree up, it was use of the chainsaw and around the tree, put very specifically. And so we've already instituted a lot of changes right now, a lot of things have been done, but he's gonna write a report and give us some things that are not gonna work up. So they're doing an investigation. It's actually been very profitable. I have not received anything in writing. I've just had several meetings with them. And yes, that incident was posted live on Facebook, and there was a comment forwarded to the Bureau of Workers' Comp. And their whole emphasis, of course, is the protection. I would have to say the protection not only of our employees, but also of public.
Right.
Especially if the public that's close by or anything like that. So, you know, I feel like we've always had a good relationship with them. Came to my office, showed up unannounced, and didn't realize, so, you know, we're
Okay.
talking with them and working through it right now. Yes.
Thank you. Any other new business? Announcement of our scheduled meetings.
Next regular session of council is Monday, January 24th. The meeting following is February 14th. I apologize for that date. Hopefully your significant others will not care that it's on the 14th. But those meetings are at 6:30 PM here in council chambers. There are no special committee meetings or special council meetings. Upcoming committee meetings for the next 30 days. Finance Committee, January 24th at 6 PM, and following is Finance, February 14th at 6 PM here in council chambers.
So, with that being said, we were all given our committee assignments tonight. The chairperson should get with Teresa and arrange your meeting schedule as soon as possible. And she can help you out, but you can also look at previously scheduled meetings from the previous years and see what you want to continue. Of course, the chairman can set the time and date and work with committee members on that, but please try to do that in a timely manner so that the public can know when these meetings are going to occur. There's several things we have to do to let the public know that we're meeting and when we're meeting, where we're meeting, and how often we're meeting, that type of thing. So please do that as quickly as possible. Reading of the bills.
We have one bill, $413.40 for publication of legislation in the MNCO paper, and it's payable to PNC, our credit card holder.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to pay the bill.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pay the bill. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. We already did an executive session. There is no need for another one. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President, I'd like to make that motion that we adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.